My name is Alara Vance. For 10 years, the only title I ever held in the Ashworth mansion was the girl they took in. It was a title spoken in whispers at lavish parties. A convenient label that meant I was somewhere above a servant but leagues below family. I was the ghost in the machine of their perfect lives, the one who made sure the silver was polished, the flowers were fresh, and the embarrassing truths were kept neatly out of sight. And tonight, the most important night of their lives, my primary role was to be invisible. But a secret I'd carried for years, a promise whispered over a hospital bed, and the arrival of one of the most powerful men in the world were about to collide in their grand marble foyer. They had spent a decade treating me like a maid, but they had no idea that the reclusive billionaire they were about to beg for a lifeline, Mr. Sterling, had a very different name for me. The air in the house was thick with the scent of lilies and desperation. Every surface gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, reflecting the nervous energy of the Ashworth family. Eleanor Ashworth, the matriarch, glided through the rooms like a shark in silk, her eyes missing nothing. She ran a white-gloved finger along a gilded picture frame, checking for dust that wasn't there. "Ilara!" she called, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the low hum of the industrial-grade kitchen fans. I emerged from the pantry, my hands dusty with flour from the brioche I had just finished proofing. I was wearing a simple black dress, my uniform of invisibility, my long brown hair pulled back in a tight, functional bun. "Yes, Eleanor?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, a skill I had perfected over a decade of practice. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on a microscopic smudge on the French doors leading to the garden. "The Waterford crystal. It's not sparkling. It's merely clean. I want it to blind our guest. Use the silk cloths, and for God's sake, don't leave any fingerprints. Mr. Sterling notices everything." Her daughter, Victoria, who was lounging on a velvet chaise and scrolling through her phone, let out a bored sigh. "Honestly, Mother, it's just a business dinner. You're acting like the Queen is coming." Victoria was 2 years older than me, blonde, beautiful, and venomously entitled. To her, I wasn't a person. I was a household utility, like the dishwasher or the Wi-Fi. She looked up from her phone, her blue eyes scanning my simple dress with disdain. "And can you do something about that?" she said, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. "At least put on one of my old cocktail dresses. We can't have you looking like the scullery maid when you open the door." "She won't be opening the door," Eleanor snapped. "Harrison will handle the door. Alara's job tonight is to remain in the kitchen unless she is explicitly called for. This deal is worth billions. Billions. The future of this family, of Ashworth Industries, depends on this dinner going perfectly. There can be no mistakes, no distractions." She finally turned her icy gaze on me. "Do you understand, Alara? You are a background element, a ghost, seen only when necessary, and silent always." I just nodded, the familiar knot of humiliation tightening in my stomach. "Yes, Eleanor, I understand. This was my life. A constant balancing act of servitude and silence, all while living under the roof of the man who was once my father's best friend. Richard Ashworth, the patriarch, had made a promise to my dying father to look after me, his only child, after a car crash took both my parents. He'd kept the promise of providing a roof over my head, but he'd outsourced the promise of kindness to his wife and daughter, who had failed to deliver. Tonight, they were courting Marcus Sterling, the legendary and almost mythical CEO of Sterling Enterprises. He was a tech visionary who had disappeared from public life 5 years ago but still controlled a global empire. He rarely took meetings, and almost never in person. Securing this dinner was a coup that Richard Ashworth had been working on for over a year. The partnership they were proposing would save their company, which was hemorrhaging money and teetering on the edge of irrelevance. They thought they were bringing him here to see their legacy of power and class. They thought the perfectly polished crystal and the 5-course meal I was preparing would impress him. They had no idea that Mr. Sterling wasn't coming to see them at all. He was coming to see me. They didn't know about the encrypted emails, the secure servers, or the project I worked on every night in my small attic room after they had all gone to sleep. They didn't know that their entire future rested in the hands of the girl they called the Maid. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. My story is about to take a turn you will never see coming, and before I tell you how a single word from a billionaire changed my life forever, please hit that like and subscribe button. You're going to want to hear the rest of this. Before I explain the impossible reality of that night, you need to understand the decade that led up to it. You need to understand the promise that brought me to this gilded cage. My father, Dr. Eris Vance, was a genius. He wasn't a businessman like Richard Ashworth. He was a pure, unadulterated creator. He was a pioneer in artificial intelligence, a man who saw the future in lines of code and complex algorithms. Richard was his college roommate, the pragmatist to my father's dreamer. They founded a small tech startup together in their early 20s. My dad built the technology. Richard sold it. It was a perfect partnership, until it wasn't. Richard had a vision for corporate expansion, for profits and boardrooms. My father just wanted to build beautiful things that could help people. Eventually, they sold the company for a fortune. Richard used his share to build Ashworth Industries, a traditional manufacturing empire. My father used his to create a small, independent research lab where he could work without the pressure of shareholder meetings. He and my mother, a brilliant botanist, lived a quiet, happy life focused on their work and on me. Richard and my father remained friends, a connection held together by the nostalgia of their shared history. We'd see the Ashworths a few times a year for holidays. I remember their house seeming so impossibly large and cold. Even then, Eleanor would smile her tight, polite smile, and Victoria would eye my department store clothes with a kind of clinical pity. My father always told me, "Don't mind them, Ellie. They live in a different world. We have something they'll never have. Passion." I was 12 when the crash happened. A drunk driver ran a red light. My parents were gone in an instant. I remember Richard Ashworth at the hospital, his face looking genuinely grief-stricken. He knelt down to my level, his expensive suit crinkling, and put his hands on my shoulders. "I promised your father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised him I would always look after you if anything happened. You're going to come live with us. You're family now." For the first few months, it felt almost true. They gave me a beautiful room, bought me new clothes, and Eleanor would even ask me about my day at school. But the grief that had briefly softened them soon hardened back into their usual form. My presence became a constant, inconvenient reminder of a promise made in a moment of emotional weakness. The shift was subtle at first. It started with small requests. "Alara, dear, could you just grab the mail? Alara, while you're up, would you mind clearing the dishes?" These small tasks slowly multiplied until they became expectations. My role as the grieving orphan morphed into that of the helpful houseguest, and then, insidiously, into the unpaid live-in assistant. My weekly allowance, which was a fraction of Victoria's, was quietly discontinued. "You live here for free, Alara," Eleanor explained. "Consider your chores part of your contribution to the household." Victoria was the primary enforcer of my new status. She found a cruel sort of delight in reminding me of my place. The year of the junior prom, I had saved up for months to buy a simple, elegant navy blue dress. I loved it more than anything. The night of the dance, I came downstairs, feeling hopeful and almost beautiful for the first time in years. Victoria was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She was holding a glass of dark soda. "Oh, Ilara," she said with a faux sweet smile. "You almost look presentable." And then she tripped, stumbling into me and emptying the entire glass down the front of my dress. The dark liquid soaked into the fabric instantly. She didn't even bother to apologize convincingly. "Clumsy me," she'd said with a smirk, before turning and walking away, leaving me standing there in a ruined dress with tears streaming down my face. I didn't go to prom. I spent the night in my room, scrubbing at a stain that would never come out, both on the dress and on my spirit. Richard never intervened. He was a ghost in his own home, always at the office or on a business trip. On the rare occasions he was present, he seemed to look right through me, as if acknowledging my growing servitude would be a betrayal of the promise he'd made to my father. It was easier for him to pretend not to see. So, I learned to survive by becoming what they wanted me to be: quiet, efficient, and invisible. I excelled in school, focusing on computer science, my father's world. It was my only connection to him. But I never spoke of my achievements at the Ashworth dinner table. My straight A's were met with polite indifference, while Victoria's C+s were celebrated with shopping sprees. My acceptance into MIT on a full scholarship was dismissed by Eleanor as a nice little project to keep you busy. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to be perpetually grateful, a permanent fixture in their home who owed them everything and deserved nothing. That was the decade that led up to this night. A decade of being ground down, of being reminded every single day that I was an outsider, a charity case. But what they never knew, what they never once bothered to ask about, was what I did in my attic room late at night, with the door locked, long after the great house had fallen silent. They had no idea that I was picking up where my father had left off. My father left behind more than just memories, and a broken promise from a friend. He left behind his life's work. After the funeral, Richard Ashworth had his assistants pack up my father's lab. Most of it was donated or sold, but one box was labeled "Personal Effects" and sent to the mansion with my things. It sat in the back of my closet for years, a painful relic I couldn't bring myself to open. It was on the night of the ruined prom dress that I finally pulled it out. Inside, beneath old photographs and letters, were 3 worn leather journals and a single, heavily encrypted hard drive. The journals were filled with his elegant handwriting, detailing his theories on generative AI, on systems that could learn and create in ways no one had ever imagined. He called his theoretical project Chimera, a nod to the mythical creature made of different parts, because he believed true AI would be a seamless fusion of logic, creativity, and ethics. The hard drive was his attempt to build it. That night, I plugged it into the cheap laptop I'd bought with my savings. It took me a month to bypass the first layer of his encryption, a puzzle of quantum physics and classical poetry only he could have devised. When I finally gained access, I found a world. It was a foundational code, brilliant and beautiful, but incomplete. It was a symphony without a final movement. And in his notes, I found a message for me. "My dearest Alara," it read, "if you are reading this, it means you have my mind and your mother's heart. This work is dangerous in the wrong hands. It could be used for control, for profit, for things I never intended. But in the right hands, it could change everything. It could solve diseases, create art, bridge divides. The world needs a conscience, and I believe that conscience is you. The key is not just in the code. It is in the ethics you build around it. Finish it, but do it your way. Be careful who you trust." Avlu, that became my secret mission. Every night, after finishing my household chores and my homework, I would retreat to my room and dive into the world of Chimera. The Ashworths thought I was just a quiet, nerdy girl. They had no idea I was wrestling with some of the most complex computational and ethical problems of our time. I taught myself advanced coding languages, studied quantum computing, and devoured philosophical texts on ethics. Chimera became my purpose, my connection to the parents I had lost. When I went to MIT, I lived a double life. By day, I was a top student. By night, I was the sole developer of a project that was light years ahead of anything being discussed in my lectures. I used the university's resources to run simulations, pushing the code further and further. But I told no one. My father's warning echoed in my head. Be careful who you trust. I certainly didn't trust the Ashworths, and I knew what would happen if Richard ever found out about Chimera. He would see it as his property, a forgotten asset of his old friend, and he would twist it into a product for profit, stripping it of its soul. The breakthrough came in my junior year. I solved a core problem that had stumped my father, creating a self-correcting ethical matrix within the AI's learning model. It was the conscience he had dreamed of. But to take it further, I needed resources, serious processing power, secure servers, things a college student couldn't afford. I needed a patron, but I couldn't risk exposing my identity. So I created a ghost. I built a completely anonymous online persona, Prometheus, and wrote a white paper on my ethical matrix, posting it on a niche, encrypted forum for high-level AI theorists. I gave away just enough to prove the concept without revealing the core technology. 3 days later, I received a reply. It wasn't from a theorist. It was from a name I recognized instantly. A legend. Marcus Sterling. His public email was well known, but this came from a private, encrypted address. The message was simple. Your work is either the most brilliant hoax I've ever seen, or it's the future. I'm betting on the future. I want to fund you, anonymously. No questions asked about your identity. We will communicate through this channel only. A blind trust will be established. Send me a budget. Let's change the world. For the past 5 years, that is what we had done. Marcus Sterling, the man the world thought was a recluse, became my silent partner. He funneled millions into my project through a labyrinth of shell corporations, allowing me to build a small, remote team of the brightest minds I could find, all working under strict non-disclosure agreements. None of them knew who I was. To them, I was Prometheus. To Marcus Sterling, I was the architect. We communicated almost daily, a partnership of minds built on mutual respect and a shared vision. He never once asked for my real name. He said it was better that way. He was protecting me, allowing me to work without the pressures of the outside world until I was ready. My attic room at the Ashworths became my secret headquarters. While they slept in their lavish suites, I was running a multi-million-dollar research and development operation, building the most advanced AI on the planet. I had published papers under my Prometheus alias that were now being taught in the very halls of MIT I had just graduated from. And now, Marcus Sterling was coming to dinner. It was his idea. "It's time, architect," he had written 2 weeks ago. "Chimera is ready for its public debut, and you are ready to step out of the shadows. The world needs to see the face behind the future. It's time for Ashworth Industries to understand the true nature of the legacy they abandoned. Let's give them a night they'll never forget." The day of the dinner was a masterclass in controlled chaos, and I was at the epicenter. My responsibilities were twofold and diametrically opposed. Execute a Michelin star-worthy dining experience for the most important guest the Ashworths had ever entertained, and simultaneously coordinate the final launch sequence for Chimera with my team, who were scattered across 3 different time zones. The irony was a bitter pill. On one screen, I was finalizing the sauce reduction for the pan-seared scallops. On the other, hidden from view, I was running the last diagnostic on a quantum AI that could reshape global economics. Eleanor, oblivious, was in a state of high-strung perfectionism. She had changed the floral arrangements 3 times, insisting the previous ones were too funereal and then too festive. She marched into the kitchen at noon, her face a mask of anxiety. "The wine," she announced, as if declaring a national emergency. "Richard says we must serve the 98 Chateau Margaux. It's in the deep cellar. The key is in his office, in the top right drawer of his desk. Be exceptionally careful, Alara. A single bottle is worth more than your entire wardrobe." I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. "I'll get it now." I walked through the silent house to Richard's study, a room I rarely entered. It was a shrine to his success. All dark wood, leather, and self-congratulation. Framed photos of him with governors and celebrities lined the walls. On the corner of his massive mahogany desk was a single, small silver frame. It was a picture of him and my father, young and beaming, standing in front of their first office. A wave of sadness washed over me. This was the man who had promised to protect me. I found the key and went down to the cellar. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and aging wine. The Chateau Margaux was in a locked case, and as I carefully lifted a bottle, the silence was broken by voices from the hallway above. Eleanor and Richard were having a hushed, urgent conversation. The vents carried their words down to me with perfect clarity. "Are you certain about this, Richard?" Eleanor asked, her voice laced with a rare note of uncertainty. "Relying on Sterling is a massive gamble. What if he says no?" "He won't say no," Richard replied, his voice a low growl of confidence. "He needs our manufacturing infrastructure to scale his new hardware division. We are the only legacy company with the capacity and prestige he requires. This isn't a partnership, it's a coronation. Tonight, he will see the power of the Ashworth name, the stability of our empire." There was a pause. Then Eleanor said, "And what about her, Ilara? Are you sure it's wise to even have her in the house?" "She's a loose end." A reminder. My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear closer to the vent. "She's a non-entity, Eleanor," Richard said with chilling finality. "She'll be in the kitchen. Sterling will never even see her. To him, she'll be just another part of the household staff, if he notices her at all. After this deal is done, we can finally settle her account." "Settle her account?" Eleanor echoed. "I've been thinking," Richard continued, his voice dropping even lower. "It's time she moved on. We've fulfilled my promise to Eris. We raised her. Now she's an adult. We can set her up in a small apartment, give her a modest trust fund enough to show our generosity, but not enough to be a burden. It's time to close that chapter. She served her purpose." I stood there in the dark, cold cellar, a priceless bottle of wine in my hand, and felt the last vestiges of my childish hope crumble into dust. She served her purpose. They weren't my family. They were my keepers. I was an obligation they had finally decided to discharge. I felt a surge of cold, clear anger. My father had trusted this man. He had placed his only daughter's life in his hands. And to Richard, I was just an account to be settled. The sadness I'd felt moments before was burned away by a sudden, fierce resolve. They thought tonight was about their future. They were wrong. It was about mine. It was about my father's legacy. And I was done being a ghost in their house. I carried the wine upstairs, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. As I passed Victoria in the hall, she deliberately stuck out her foot, trying to trip me. I sidestepped her with a fluid motion, not even breaking stride. "Watch it, Maid," she sneered. I didn't respond. I just continued to the kitchen, placed the wine in its decanter, and checked my hidden laptop. My team lead had sent a message. "Prometheus, all systems green. Diagnostic complete. Chimera is stable and ready for deployment on your command." I typed back a single line. "Stand by for launch sequence. Tonight." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns, Eleanor gathered the household staff, including me, for a final briefing. "Tonight," she said, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of her ambition. "We are all actors in a play about perfection, and none of you will miss your cue." She looked directly at me. "Your role is the most critical. Silence and invisibility. Am I clear?" "Crystal," I said, my voice steady. She didn't notice the double meaning. They had cast me in a role, but they had no idea I had already rewritten the entire script. The stage was set. The actors were in place, and the audience of one was about to arrive. At precisely 7 o'clock, the deep, resonant chime of the doorbell echoed through the mansion. A sudden electric stillness fell over the house. Every Ashworth froze in place. Richard smoothed his already perfect tie. Eleanor took a deep, centering breath. Victoria fluffed her hair, a predatory gleam in her eyes. It was showtime. Harrison, the butler, a man who had been with the family for 30 years and had always shown me a quiet kindness, walked stiffly to the grand double doors and pulled them open. The man standing on the threshold was not what I had expected. For a figure of such immense power and mythic reputation, Marcus Sterling was remarkably understated. He was tall and lean, perhaps in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent, watchful eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored, dark gray suit, but no tie. There was an aura of quiet confidence about him, a stillness that made the Ashworths' frantic energy seem all the more pathetic. "Mr. Sterling," Richard boomed, striding forward with his hand outstretched, his voice radiating a practiced corporate warmth. "An absolute honor to welcome you to our home. I'm Richard Ashworth." Sterling shook his hand, his grip firm but brief. "Richard, thank you for the invitation." His voice was calm and measured, with a warmth that felt genuine, unlike Richard's. "And this is my wife, Eleanor," Richard continued, gesturing to his side. Eleanor gave a graceful, almost imperceptible curtsy. "A pleasure, Mr. Sterling. We are so delighted you could join us." "Eleanor," Sterling said, with a simple, polite nod. "My daughter, Victoria, and my son, Julian," Richard said, completing the introductions. Victoria stepped forward and offered her hand, her smile dazzling. "It's amazing to finally meet you, Mr. Sterling. I'm a huge admirer of your work." Julian, who had been standing awkwardly in the background, just gave a slight wave and a mumbled, "Hey." Sterling's eyes lingered on each of them for a moment, a polite but analytical gaze that seemed to see right through their carefully constructed facades. From my vantage point in the shadowed hallway leading to the kitchen, I watched the scene unfold. I was exactly where Eleanor wanted me to be, out of sight. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a mixture of terror and exhilarating anticipation. This was the man I had worked with for 5 years, the man who had funded my dream and believed in my vision without ever needing to know my name. And now he was just 50 feet away. The Ashworths led him into the grand salon for drinks. Richard immediately launched into a monologue about the history of the mansion, the provenance of the artwork, the legacy of the Ashworth name. It was a clumsy, transparent attempt to establish his own importance. Sterling listened patiently, sipping the sparkling water he had requested instead of champagne, his eyes continuously scanning the room, moving past the expensive paintings and antique furniture. It was a subtle, restless search. I knew what, or rather, who he was looking for. I was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on the amuse-bouche, a delicate spoonful of lobster bisque foam with a single chive blossom. My hands were steady, my focus absolute. Cooking had always been my sanctuary, a place of order and creation in a chaotic world. Tonight, it was my shield. The intercom buzzed. It was Eleanor. "Ilara, the canapes, now." Her voice was tight with tension. I loaded the silver tray, took a deep breath, and pushed open the swinging door. The conversation in the salon stopped as I entered. I kept my eyes downcast, just as I'd been trained to do, focusing on the tray in my hands. I moved silently around the room, offering the small bites to the guests. I could feel their eyes on me, but their gazes were dismissive. I was part of the decor, a mobile piece of furniture. I served Victoria first, then Julian, then Eleanor. When I approached Richard and Mr. Sterling, Richard waved me away impatiently, annoyed at the interruption to his story about a hostile takeover he'd navigated in the early 2000s. "Not now," he mouthed, his jaw tight. I began to turn away, my duty fulfilled. But then, a calm voice cut through the air. "I'd like one." It was Marcus Sterling. He had stopped speaking and was looking directly at me. His eyes weren't dismissive. They were curious, knowing, and held a glint of amusement. I stopped and turned back, extending the tray towards him. Richard looked momentarily flustered, irritated that Sterling's attention had been diverted from him to, of all people, me. Sterling took one of the canapes, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. A jolt, like an electric current, passed through me. He popped the small bite into his mouth, and his eyes widened slightly in genuine appreciation. "This is excellent," he said, his voice clear and carrying across the silent room. The balance of saffron and citrus is perfect. Who is the chef? Richard laughed. A forced, hearty sound. Oh, we have a wonderful staff. The best in Boston. He was already trying to reclaim the conversation, to steer it back to things that mattered, like money and power. But Sterling didn't look away from me. He held my gaze, and a slow smile spread across his face. It was a smile of shared secrets, of a long-awaited meeting. He ignored Richard completely, took a step closer to me, and spoke the words that would shatter the Ashworth's world forever. "The work you do is truly remarkable," he said, his voice filled with a profound respect that no one in this house had ever shown me. "I've been looking forward to this meeting for a very long time, boss." The word hung in the opulent air of the salon, shimmering and impossible. Boss. It was a word so completely alien to its surroundings, so contrary to the established order of this house, that for a full 3 seconds, no one seemed to process it. It was as if he had spoken in a foreign language. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the crackling fire and the distant city hum. I watched, as if in slow motion, as the single word detonated in the room. Richard Ashworth's practiced smile froze on his face, twitching at the corners. His hand, which had been gesturing expansively to a Monet on the wall, remained suspended in midair. Eleanor's perfect posture went rigid, her spine turning to steel, her hand clutching the stem of her wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Julian, who usually slouched through life with an air of detached indifference, actually straightened up, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. And Victoria. Her reaction was the most telling. Her mouth, which had been curved into a flirtatious smirk aimed at Sterling, fell open. A look of pure, uncomprehending disgust washed over her features, as if she had just witnessed a beloved pet transform into a monster. Her brain simply could not compute the data it was receiving. The most powerful man in the room was addressing the household maid with a title of ultimate authority. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but on the outside, I willed myself to be calm. This was the moment, the one Marcus and I had planned, the one I had both dreaded and dreamed of for years. I met his gaze, and in his eyes, I saw not a billionaire CEO, but my partner, my mentor, the silent guardian of my father's legacy. I gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. I lowered the silver tray and placed it on a nearby table, my movements deliberate and steady. My role as the maid was over. It was Richard who broke the spell, letting out a choked, disbelieving laugh. "Boss?" he repeated, his voice strained. "Marcus, you have a strange sense of humor. This is Alara. She's the girl who helps us out around the house. A sort of distant family ward." He said the word ward, as if it explained everything, as if it were a synonym for person of no consequence. Sterling didn't even glance at him. His focus remained entirely on me. "Ilara Vance," he said, his voice resonating with warmth and pride. "The founder and chief architect of Prometheus Innovations. And, for the last 5 years, my most trusted and brilliant partner." He turned his body slightly, creating a subtle but unmistakable alliance between us, a protective barrier against the gaping Ashworths. "I believe," he continued, now addressing the room, "that you all know her as Alara. I, however, know her as Prometheus, the mind behind the ethical AI framework that is about to revolutionize our industry." The name Prometheus's landed like a second explosion. Richard's face went white. As a man who at least pretended to follow the tech world, he would have known that name. Prometheus was a legend, a ghost in the machine who had published a series of groundbreaking papers on AI ethics and quantum cognition. The work was so advanced that major universities and corporations, including Ashworth Industries, had tried and failed to recruit the anonymous genius behind it. "Prometheus?" Richard whispered, the word barely audible. That's that's not possible. Prometheus is one of the leading AI theorists in the world. Alara is... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Alara is just a girl. Our girl. The help. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick with a decade of condescension. Alara is a genius. Sterling finished for him, his voice now holding a sharp, protective edge. A fact you would have known if you had ever bothered to ask her about the MIT degree in computer science and applied mathematics she earned with highest honors. A fact you would have known if you had paid attention to anything other than how well she could polish your silver. He took a step back and looked around the magnificent room, his gaze finally taking in the opulent decor. But now his expression was one of distaste. You invited me here, Richard, to show me the strength of your legacy. Your beautiful house, your fine art, your perfect family. But legacies aren't built on appearances. They are built on vision, on substance, and the greatest legacy in this room, the legacy of Dr. Aris Vance, has been living in your attic, working tirelessly while you remained utterly and unforgivably blind. He turned back to me, his expression softening. I believe we have a deal to discuss, boss. But perhaps we should do it somewhere more conducive to an actual business meeting. This place feels a little stifling. The Ashworths stood frozen, statues in their own museum of denial, as the world they had built with such meticulous care began to crumble around them, all because of a single, impossible word. The stunned silence in the room was finally shattered by Victoria. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half scoff, a noise of pure, undiluted disbelief. "This is a joke, right?" she said, looking wildly between me and Sterling. "This is some kind of elaborate, sick joke. You hired him, didn't you?" She pointed an accusing, trembling finger at me. "You found some actor to come in here and humiliate us because you were jealous. You were always jealous of me, of our family." Her accusation was so absurd, so deeply rooted in her own solipsistic worldview, that it was almost pitiful. Before I could even respond, Sterling spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Ashworth," he said, and the formal address was a weapon in itself. "I can assure you, I am not an actor, and the only person who should be feeling humiliated in this room right now is you." Richard finally found his footing, his shock morphing into a wave of indignant fury. He took a step towards Sterling, his face flushed with anger. "Now see here, Marcus," he began, his corporate bully persona kicking in. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I will not have you come into my home and insult my family. And you will not speak to my daughter that way." "Your home?" Sterling replied, raising an eyebrow. "A home where you allow the daughter of your supposed best friend to be treated as an unpaid servant? A home where her brilliance was so thoroughly ignored that you are now standing on the precipice of financial ruin because you were too arrogant to see the lifeline living under your own roof?" He turned his gaze back to Richard, and all the quiet warmth was gone, replaced by glacial cold. "Let me be very clear, Richard, because you seem to be a bit slow on the uptake. I am not here to partner with Ashworth Industries. Your company is a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era, propped up by debt and reputation alone. I am here to partner with Alara Vance, CEO of Vance AI. Vance AI. He said the name of the company I'd officially incorporated just last week. Hearing it spoken aloud in this house, in front of these people, felt like the breaking of a spell. "And what," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone had to strain to hear, "is Vance AI's flagship product? It's a little project called Chimera." At the name Chimera, a flicker of recognition crossed Richard's face. It was the name of the project file on my father's old hard drive, the one he had dismissed as a dead-end hobby project years ago. "Chimera is the AI you've been reading about in the financial pages," Sterling explained, enjoying the dramatic reveal. "The one that has every venture capital firm from Silicon Valley to Shanghai in a frenzy. The technology that will redefine data security, logistics, and medical research for the next century. Your proposal to me was to partner on hardware manufacturing, a low-margin, high-overhead business. What I am proposing is to be the exclusive hardware provider for Chimera, a deal that will be worth 10 times what your entire company is valued at. He let that sink in. The air was thick with the smell of shattered entitlement. He then delivered the final, devastating blow. The deal, however, is not mine to make. It is hers. He gestured to me. Vance AI is Alara's company. The intellectual property is hers, inherited from her father and perfected by her own genius. Ashworth Industries needs this partnership to survive. Therefore, Richard, the person you need to be negotiating with is not me. It's the girl you were planning to settle the account of and move into a small apartment. He knew. He must have been listening, just as I had. Or perhaps he had simply anticipated their callousness. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked from Sterling to her husband, horrified at being so completely exposed. Richard looked as if he had been physically struck. All the blood had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, gray color. How could you know that? He stammered. Because men like you are painfully predictable, Sterling said with a sigh. You see promises as obligations to be managed, not honors to be upheld. You see people as assets or liabilities. You saw a brilliant orphan girl and filed her under liability. A tragic miscalculation. He looked at me then, his expression softening. I believe the floor is yours, Alara. For the first time, all eyes in the room were on me. Not with pity or disdain or indifference, but with a new, terrifying emotion. Fear. They were finally seeing me, not as the maid, but as the executioner of their future. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. I stood a little taller, took a deep breath, and prepared to speak my truth for the first time in 10 years. The silence that followed Sterling's pronouncement was different. It was no longer the silence of shock, but of anticipation. It was the heavy, charged silence of a courtroom waiting for a verdict. The Ashworths stared at me, their faces a gallery of disbelief and dawning horror. For a decade, my voice had been the quietest in this house. I spoke only when spoken to, my words carefully chosen to be agreeable, apologetic, and unobtrusive. Now, the most powerful man they had ever met had just handed me the microphone, and I could feel the weight of 10 years of unspoken words rising in my throat. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My power was not in volume, but in the truth. I looked at each of them, one by one, holding their gaze until they were forced to look away. I started with Eleanor. You were worried about the crystal, Eleanor, I said, my voice calm and even. You wanted it to blind your guest, but you've been blind for 10 years. You saw a grieving child, and instead of offering comfort, you saw a new pair of hands to do the work you felt was beneath you. You taught me how to fold napkins into swans for your dinner parties, but you never once asked me about the theorems I was solving for my calculus homework. You cared more about fingerprints on the furniture than the future of the girl living in your attic. You wanted a ghost, and you got one. But ghosts have a tendency to watch, to learn, and to remember everything. Her face, usually a mask of haughty control, crumpled. She sank onto the sofa, looking small and defeated. Then I turned to Victoria. You called me a maid, I said, and her head snapped up, a flash of her old defiance in her eyes. And you were right. That's exactly how you treated me. Do you remember my junior prom dress, Victoria, the navy blue one? You accidentally spilled a soda on it because you couldn't stand the thought of me feeling beautiful for even one night. That stain never came out, but it taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me that people like you don't destroy things because they are strong. They destroy things because they are weak. They see light in others, and their first instinct is to snuff it out because their own lives are so dim. While you were busy curating your social media feed and chasing fleeting popularity, I was building something real, something that will last. Your life is a collection of perfect-looking moments. My life is a legacy. She flinched as if I had slapped her, her face turning a mottled red. For the first time, she was speechless. I skipped Julian. His sin was one of omission, of cowardly silence. He wasn't my target. My final gaze rested on Richard. "And you," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "You are the biggest disappointment of all. My father loved you. He trusted you. He called you his brother. He died believing that you would be my protector, my family." I took a step closer to him, into his personal space, a boundary I had never dared to cross. "And what did you do with that sacred trust? You used it as a shield for your conscience. You gave me a roof and called it kindness. You ignored my pain and called it letting me build character. You saw your best friend's daughter turn into your wife's unpaid assistant and you did nothing, because it was convenient. You told Eleanor you were going to settle my account and close the chapter. You don't close chapters on people, Richard, especially not on the children of the man who helped you build your first fortune." I paused, letting the weight of my words press down on him. My father's greatest work wasn't chimera. It was his belief in the inherent goodness of people. His greatest mistake was believing that goodness existed in you. You didn't just fail me, Richard. You failed him. You took his memory, and you tarnished it with your neglect. I saw something break in his eyes then. Not just his pride, but something deeper. The carefully constructed image of himself as a loyal friend, as an honorable man, was shattering before his very eyes. The room was heavy with the wreckage of their self-perception. I had not yelled. I had not cried. I had simply held up a mirror, and they could not stand the reflection. "So, yes," I concluded, my voice clear and strong, my gaze sweeping across all of them. "We have a deal to discuss. But let's be perfectly clear about the terms of this negotiation. You are not my family. You are potential business associates. And you will address me as Miss Vance. The meeting will take place tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Not here. At my offices." I turned to Marcus Sterling. "My car is waiting, Marcus. Shall we go?" He smiled. A genuine, proud smile. "After you, boss." And with that, I turned my back on them and walked out of the house that had been my prison, leaving them to suffocate in the ruins of their own making. The drive away from the Ashworth mansion was surreal. As the Bentley's tires crunched over the gravel driveway, and we passed through the ornate iron gates, I looked back at the grand house, its windows glowing like malevolent eyes in the darkness. It was the first time I had left that property without feeling like I was on a leash, without the weight of an expected return time. I was leaving for good. In the quiet, leather-scented interior of the car, Marcus Sterling was silent for a long moment, giving me space to breathe. "Are you all right?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. I turned from the window and looked at him. "I think so," I said, surprised to find that it was true. "I feel lighter." "What you did in there took a strength I've rarely seen," he said. "You didn't just confront them. You held them accountable. There's a difference." The next morning, at precisely 9 a.m., Richard and Julian Ashworth were shown into the conference room of my temporary executive suite, which I had leased under the Vance AI name weeks ago. Eleanor and Victoria were not present. It was a clear sign that Richard was attempting to reframe this as a purely business matter, a desperate attempt to salvage some semblance of his old authority. The office was modern, minimalist, and filled with light, the absolute antithesis of the dark, heavy opulence of his study. I was already seated at the head of the large glass table, my laptop open, a team of 2 of my top legal advisors on a video call on the large screen behind me. Marcus was seated at my right hand, not as a participant, but as an observer, his presence a silent testament to whose side he was on. Richard and Julian looked exhausted and diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grim, weary resignation. They sat down opposite me, the vast expanse of the glass table, a stark symbol of the new distance between us. "Good morning," I said, my tone crisp and professional. "Thank you for coming. I assume you are here to discuss the potential acquisition of certain assets from Ashworth Industries by Vance AI. Richard flinched at the word acquisition. He had come here still clinging to the hope of a partnership, an alliance. He had not yet grasped the totality of his new reality. Ilara, Miss Vance. He corrected himself, stumbling over the name. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We came to discuss a collaboration, a mutually beneficial partnership between our two great companies. I didn't smile. I simply pushed a tablet across the table towards him. There is no misunderstanding, Richard. What you are looking at is the latest quarterly report for Ashworth Industries, which, as a private company, you don't release publicly. But as part of my due diligence, I was able to compile a rather accurate picture of your financial health. You are leveraged to the hilt. Your profit margins have been shrinking for 3 consecutive years, and you have a massive debt payment due in 4 months that you have no realistic way of making. You are not looking for a partner. You are looking for a bailout. His face went ashen as he scrolled through the data. I had laid his company's failures bare. I had done my homework. Julian stared at the tablet, his expression one of dawning comprehension. He was seeing the truth for the first time, unfiltered by his father's bluster. So, I continued, leaning forward. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is a rescue operation. Here are my terms. My lawyers on the screen began to speak, their voices outlining the deal with cold, legal precision. Vance AI would not partner with Ashworth Industries. Instead, Vance AI would acquire Ashworth's entire research and development division, along with its associated patents and facilities, for a price that was fair market value, but not a penny more. This injection of cash would be enough for Richard to satisfy his creditors and keep the core manufacturing part of his business from going into bankruptcy. The Ashworth name would survive, but its innovative future would be entirely owned by me. And what about us? Julian asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, stripped of the usual apathy. He seemed genuinely curious. My father? Me? I looked at him. For all his passive complicity, I had always sensed something different in Julian, a discomfort with his family's cruelty that he was simply too weak to act on. Your father will be offered a 2-year transitional contract as a consultant, I said. He will have no executive authority. His role will be to ensure a smooth handover of client relationships. After that, he will be retired with a pension. I then turned to Julian. As for you, your position as Vice President of Operations is redundant. However, the acquisition will create new roles. If you are interested in an actual job, one with real responsibilities and performance metrics, you can apply for the position of Junior Project Manager in the Logistics Division. You will report to my COO. You will start at the bottom, and you will earn your place based on merit, not your last name. The choice is yours. Julian was silent, processing the offer. It was both an insult and an opportunity, a demotion in title but a promotion in substance. Richard looked at me, his eyes pleading. Alara, after all these years, is this what it comes down to? Revenge? I shook my head. This isn't revenge, Richard. Revenge is emotional. This is a business decision. I am salvaging the part of your company that has potential and restructuring the rest. I am doing what a good CEO would do. It's the kind of ruthless, logical decision you always claimed to admire. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. You have 24 hours to accept the terms. My offer is non-negotiable. If you decline, I will simply wait 4 months and buy your assets from the bank in a bankruptcy auction for a fraction of the price. The choice is yours. I walked out of the conference room without a backward glance, leaving them with the stark reality of their new world. The power was mine now, not just to build, but to reshape the very foundations of the family that had discarded me. 6 months later, I stood on a darkened stage. The only illumination a single, soft spotlight that made the air around me feel sacred and still. Before me, an ocean of 10,000 faces, the brightest minds in technology, The most powerful investors, the most ruthless journalists held their collective breath. The iconic, newly unveiled Vance AI logo, a stylized chimera with wings of light, pulsed gently on the enormous screen behind me. This was the keynote address at the World Technology Summit, the most coveted speaking slot in the industry, and I was about to formally introduce my father's dream and my life's work to the world. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of my new life, a life now measured in board meetings, patent filings, and the ever-present hum of servers bringing an unprecedented intelligence to life. My home was no longer a dusty attic of secrets, but a penthouse of glass and light overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a place where the only ghosts were the welcome memories of my parents, their smiling faces in photographs I could finally display with pride, not pain. For centuries, I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous auditorium. We have been told myths about fire. We were told of Prometheus, who stole it from the gods and gave it to humanity, an act of compassionate rebellion that brought both enlightenment and peril. I paused, letting the name of my old alias hang in the air. Today, we stand at the threshold of a new fire. Not the fire of combustion, but the fire of cognition, artificial intelligence. And like that first fire, it holds the power to warm our homes or burn them to the ground. I walked slowly across the stage, my image projected onto screens the size of buildings. The question has never been if we should pursue this new fire. The question has always been how. How do we build not just intelligence, but wisdom? Not just a tool, but a partner? Not just a brain, but a conscience? On the screen, the Chimera logo dissolved into a mesmerizing visualization of the AI's ethical matrix at work, a dance of logic and empathy. This was the question my father, Dr. Aris Vance, dedicated his life to, and it is the question we at Vance AI have finally answered. The launch of Chimera was more than a product debut. It was the fulfillment of a legacy. The reception was explosive, exceeding even my most optimistic projections. Vance AI became an overnight titan, our IPO shattering records. I found myself on the cover of magazines, the subject of documentaries, the architect of the future. But the public victory, as monumental as it was only a fraction of the story. The truly profound changes had happened away from the cameras, in the quiet, difficult restructuring of a family and a life. The Ashworths, as I knew them, had ceased to exist. They had accepted my terms because ruin was the only alternative. Richard, in his new role as a consultant, was a ghost of a different sort. He haunted the new open-plan offices of the Vance AI Enterprise Division, what was once the heart of his empire. The first few months were a painful ballet of strained politeness. He was a king in exile, forced to watch as I dismantled the bloated, inefficient management structure he had built, replacing his cronies with bright, merit-based hires. He saw me foster a culture of collaboration and respect, the very things he had ruled through fear and intimidation. He was forced to witness a better way, and the daily exposure to it began to erode the foundations of his decades-old arrogance. The turning point came during a tense negotiation with a long-standing German client who was skeptical of the acquisition. Richard, using the institutional knowledge I lacked, masterfully navigated the cultural nuances and personal history with their CEO. But he did it using the strategic framework I had provided, a blend of his old-world relationship building and my new-world technological superiority. We won the contract, a massive 9-figure deal. That evening, he lingered in my office after the team had left to celebrate. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, a mirror of that first, terrible dinner. He stood by the window, not looking at me, but at the sprawling city below. "I used to think business was a war," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual bluster. "You conquer or you are conquered. You dominate or you are destroyed. Every negotiation was a battlefield. Every employee was a soldier to be commanded. He turned to face me then, and in his eyes I saw a depth of weariness I had never witnessed before. But you don't command, Alara. You inspire. You build consensus. You treat every mind in the room, from the janitor to the lead engineer, as a valuable asset. I watched you today. You didn't just win a contract. You built a true partnership. It's a better way to do business. It's the way your father always talked about. He took a shaky breath, his composure finally cracking. He tried to tell me. For years, I called him a dreamer, an idealist. I told him the real world would eat him alive. His eyes welled up with tears he did not try to hide. But he was the one who was right. I spent 40 years building an empire of sand, and you have built an empire of substance in a fraction of the time. He would be so incredibly proud of you. He finally said the words that were both a confession and a plea. And I am so sorry for how I failed you both. It wasn't a perfect apology. It couldn't erase a decade of neglect, but it was real. It was the sound of a man finally taking account of his own soul, and in that moment, I saw not the monster of my past, but a flawed, broken man trying to find his way back. And I realized my own healing depended not on his forgiveness, but on mine. Julian's transformation was just as profound, though far quieter. Taking the junior project manager position was an act of rebellion against his own inertia. He was mocked by his old friends, pitied by former colleagues who now outranked him. The first month, he nearly quit a dozen times. He was tasked with streamlining the supply chain logistics for our new hardware rollout, a complex, thankless job. But somewhere in the long nights and endless spreadsheets, he discovered something he never knew he had: a work ethic. He found a strange, satisfying pride in solving a complex problem, in earning the quiet nod of approval from my COO, a woman who judged him solely on his results. He stopped being Richard Ashworth's son and started becoming simply Julian. One evening, I found him in the company cafeteria, poring over blueprints, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside him. He looked up, startled, as I approached. "Miss Vance," he said, instinctively straightening up. "Julian?" I said gently. "You can call me Alara when we're not in a formal meeting." A small, uncertain smile touched his lips. "I just wanted to say," he began, his gaze dropping to the blueprints. "Thank you for the opportunity. I know I didn't deserve it." "You didn't," I agreed honestly. "But you're earning it now. That's all that matters." In that small exchange, a new foundation was laid, one not of family obligation, but of mutual, professional respect. Eleanor and Victoria, however, were incapable of such evolution. Their identities were so completely fused with the Ashworth name's former glory that they could not exist without it. They were trapped in the amber of the past. Eleanor continued to host her lavish, pointless parties, but the guest lists grew shorter, the attendees less influential. She became a caricature of the society queen, presiding over a court of ghosts in a house that felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Victoria's fall was far more public and brutal. Her attempts to rebrand as a wronged heiress were met with online ridicule. The public, captivated by the story of my rise, had no sympathy for the cruel sister. Her online empire, built on a lie of effortless perfection, evaporated. She was a stark and cautionary tale. When you have no inner substance, the loss of external validation is a kind of death. Backstage at the summit, as the applause finally began to fade, Marcus handed me a flute of champagne. His eyes, which had been my anchor through 5 years of secret collaboration, were filled with a profound paternal pride. "You know, when I first read that white paper from Prometheus, I thought it was either a team from a rival corporation or an elaborate prank," he confessed with a smile. "The ideas were too elegant, too complete. I never imagined it was a single brilliant young woman working out of an attic, quietly changing the world while being ordered to polish silver." He raised his glass. "To Eris Vance's daughter." "He gave you the spark," Alara. But the fire? That was all you. We clinked glasses. The crystal chime, a perfect, clear note that seemed to cut through all the noise of the past. My journey had started with a promise made to my father to look after me, a promise I made to him to finish his work. But it had ended with a revelation. I had sought revenge, but found reclamation. I had craved justice and discovered purpose. I learned that the greatest power isn't the ability to tear down the world of those who wronged you, but the strength to build your own, on your own terms, and to furnish it with grace, integrity, and a compassion they could never understand. The Ashworths had tried to write my story, to cast me as a minor character, a footnote in their grand narrative. But they had forgotten the most fundamental rule of all. You can never truly control a person who knows their own worth. If you have ever been made to feel small, if you have been placed in a box, not of your own making, or if you have ever had to fight to have your voice heard, please share your experience in the comments below. Tell us about the moment you decided to rewrite your own script. Your story is a testament to resilience, and it deserves to be heard. And if my journey has moved you, please support this channel by hitting that like button, subscribing for more stories of transformation, and sharing this video with anyone who might be in their own attic, waiting for the right moment to show the world their fire. Thank you for listening, and never, ever forget, you are the author, the architect, and the boss of your own life. Make it a masterpiece.